Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a trainer and a therapist and a hypnotherapist, and I help people lose their weight, improve their bodies, and feel good about themselves and change their lives. I've been doing all this for over 15 years now, and one thing I can tell you after all these years is that not a lot of people actually follow through with these things and actually change themselves. That's not because they can't. Everyone can. We all have the potential to change our lives, to change our behaviors, to change everything about ourselves. We can. It's possible. But the reality is that most people just won't. And this is a hard thing to deal with for me. This is a really hard thing because, I spend all day preaching to people. And over the years, I've tried to learn all sorts of techniques to help people. Again, I said I was a hypnotherapist. That was something I learned along the way because I thought, you know what, I want to be even more influential. I want to help people change because I know that they can. I was just saying that you can. They're almost there, that they're going to do it. They want to, and they know how to. As time goes on, the whole project just falls apart and they just don't do it. This is more common than not, and if you listen to some other influencers and trainers and people out there, they're going to make it seem like, they've just got success after success and everyone's just losing weight and killing it and they follow their system and it all works 100% of the time. Let me tell you right now, literally 2% of the people who follow that are actually going to get something out of it, are actually going to follow through with it and do it. It's a sad fact, but it is what it is, right? So again, I want to emphasize the fact that people can. They just don't seem to. There are various reasons for this, right? One is that it's just not painful enough. There's the whole pain and pleasure principle, right? So it's until the pain of staying the same, the pain of being overweight, of feeling terrible, wanting more from your life, just feeling a general sense of angst and anxiety about your whole life, until that gets bad enough for you to say that, you know what, changing, dieting, exercising, doing all the things I need to do to change, until you get to that point, it just doesn't seem to happen. That's a painful way to live, right? You've got to wait till it gets super painful and then you'll do something that's less painful. It's very difficult and very uncommon for people to just be inspired by what could be. It could be better. This would be good. Life would improve so much if I did this. But we tend to just move away from pain more than towards pleasure. So you can teach someone and tell someone about all the wonderful things that they could have, but it's just not enough to motivate someone to change their whole lives. Because the fact is, whatever's going on inside, this is what I've learned after all these years, is that, it's that we always just do whatever we want to do. Whatever's inside of us, whatever we're feeling at the time is the thing you just tend to do. So if you're just busting to have that Macca's meal or that junk food or whatever it is, you tend to just do it. No intervention helps. It's just, if I want to do it, I do it. If you're just busting for it, you'll do it. And you can force yourself for a little bit. You can fight yourself for a little bit, but eventually you burn out doing that and you don't want to do it. The fact is that the inner game controls the outer game. All right? If you're trying to force your outer behaviors, inside you don't want to do it, and then outside you're forcing yourself to do it, that never lasts, right? And it's just a painful way to live anyway. This is one of the key tenets of my own personal philosophy and what I'd like to teach here. I think this is really the only thing that is going to make any sense in a long-term change process or in a long-term change project is the inner game. You need to change the inner game, and then the outer game, it just takes care of itself. And it has to be that way because you can't control the outer game. You just can't. Not for any extended period of time. Some people can force themselves and discipline themselves and, of course. But imagine doing that for 10, 20 years, just constantly forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do. No one's done that. It doesn't happen, right? So, and who wants to live that way anyway, right? So really the only way that we're going to be able to do this and enjoy our lives is to change the inner stuff, right? And then the outer behaviors just follow from that naturally. This is working on your unconscious mind, right? Because consciously intervening, it just doesn't work, right? I saw a podcast the other day from this guy, Dan Go. I don't know if you've seen him. He's pretty popular. And you know what? I love all the things that he says. I think he's totally right about all of it. He talks about things like weight loss can be a spiritual process. It's a process of learning about yourself and evolving and changing your behaviors. And that's true. Considering what pain am I trying to get away from and using it as a way to learn about yourself and grow and change. I am totally bought in on that. But I just don't think that anyone who's really in the depths of food addiction and stuck in this loop of failure, I don't know that that's really going to change their behavior. At the end of the day, if they're stuck there, they're stuck there. I've told people very similar things. I've told them about, seeing it as a personal transformation process, learning to grow from the process of weight loss. It's just someone who's really struggling to lose weight and really struggling to stay strong with their health behaviors. I've had probably about 0 people actually be changed by that. I've told thousands of people about this, but then, at the end of the day, they're like, that's nice, but I'm still struggling right now. In the midst of a strong craving, they're really having to fight themselves. They're really wanting that whole process to be different. And then they've intervened with this idea and it's changed everything for them. Like, I don't know anyone who has been able to successfully do that. They're just not in that place.
With one of my clients, for example, I've been training for about a year. We had been talking about all these sorts of things, talking about how he related to food, when and how he would eat it and the kind of emotions he was trying to avoid. And it didn't really seem to make that much difference. He would still go to the servo and just buy chocolates and lollies and soft drinks, and he constantly sneaking in food and doing it. And then no matter how much he did it, and no matter how much we would get him on the scale and weigh him, and he would see the weight going up, it just still didn't click. It didn't make the difference. No matter how much he was recognizing the behavior was moving him further and further away from his goals and further away from what he wanted. It's just that at the time, it was so compelling that he couldn't help himself. The feelings that he had at the time, they were just too much to overcome. It wasn't until after a year of just talking about these things, and then him becoming slowly more and more frustrated with himself about how he was just constantly failing and at doing the thing that he wanted to do. And then I was just saying to him, listen, we all go through that. These things take time, and I was just there facilitating the journey, right? Because you can't force yourself to be different and to change. You just got to hold the space for it to sort of happen on its own. And then that transformation happens. So, but we were looking at it and talking about it and talking around it, and then just allowing his relationship with food to be changed, so we tried different things, we did some intermittent fasting, and that in particular made a difference because he started to have an experience of behaving with food a little bit differently. And then that transformation started to happen with an idea of, when do I actually need to eat? Can I actually apply some discipline around when I eat? And they started to question everything about the food, and then about his relationship with the food. And then at some point, he was just finding that the cravings weren't the same. And his relationship with food had changed. It was an inner transformation that happened. And now he just naturally doesn't have to fight himself as much. And he's not thinking about it so much at the time, but just his whole sort of internal system has transformed. The inner work, then just the outer work just kind of naturally follows. The outer game just naturally, the momentum moves in that direction. The reason why I think that most of the industry is focused on outer game conversation, what do you eat, when do you exercise, what do you exercise, all that stuff, is because it's very easy to track and it's easy to prescribe. Do this exercise, eat this thing. It's very sort of concrete and objective. And then we can see the metrics and see what's happening. But the issue with the inner game is that it's very ambiguous. It's unclear. It's hard to see. It's hard to define. It's hard to pin down. And it's so individual. Measuring progress is very difficult. Let me just give you an example of working on the inner game, because this is, like I said, examples would be the best way to understand it. How is it that you can work on the inner game? That's a difficult thing. Say with calorie counting, for example, right? The value of doing that, most people think it's so that we can get the metrics, so we can understand how many calories you had, how many calories went in, how many went out. And of course, that's part of it. But the biggest value, the value that I personally found and that everyone I've worked with also finds, is that the value of it is actually just the realizations you have. When I first start working with people, the advice I give them is to actually not start eating the perfect diet and then tracking that. I tell them, just eat what you're already eating and then track that. Right? Because that's the thing. The thing is, if you sort of had this perfect diet and you just track those calories, that's not how you got here. That's not how you got this fat. The foods that you normally have that are the ones that are the dangerous foods for you and that put on the weight, you still don't really know how much they're worth and what damage that they've done. So the most powerful thing for people to do is to just count the calories for a period of time of the diet that you normally had, and then those realizations you have while you're tracking are so powerful, because you'll track something and then, you scan it in or you type it in and you sort of go, whoa, like I didn't realize how big that was. Like that one snack is worth half the calories for the day. That realization has a massive impact, an inner impact. Like, whoa, I thought that was no big deal. And now it is. And now every time you go to have that food next time, there's just it feels different. Now I have some negativity attached to it. I have some understanding of how much of an impact that has. And that little shift, that emotional shift, that's like an inner game shift. Yeah. So now it's changed my relationship with it. Now it's, instead of just having 100% pleasure and positivity to it, now there's almost like a deep kind of knowing about its impact. And that was something that you were sort of kind of ignoring so that you could enjoy it more, right? So when you sort of can kind of hold this delusion about like, oh, no, it's not that bad, it's not that big, look at it, But then when you have it and you realize, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And on the other end, when you're tracking things and you find that like, wow, I thought that was really bad, but it's actually not, it's actually pretty good. These kind of realizations have an inner game shift, an inner shift. So the practice of calorie tracking, if you do it in the right way or in a particular way, you can just be anxious about the numbers and, what am I going to get and how many have I had, and freak out about that. You're going to quit that. You're going to get burn out doing that, hate doing it, and then get not much out of it. Or again, you can take the focus of an inner game. You can just be looking for those things. So, and I say to people, just learn from it. Have that be your goal. Just to learn as much as you can from it, and notice those shifts. Pay attention to them. Just pay extra attention to that, and get as much out of it as you can in that sense. And then your behaviors will naturally follow from that. So that's a way to do something that seems like an outer game activity, but yet you're putting up an inner game focus on it. In saying that, though, just doing that one thing isn't enough to make people change fully and completely. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. For this one guy I was talking about before, he was doing some calorie counting, learned some things, and that helped. That made some progress. But then there was still more about his relationship with food that needed to be addressed, which he wasn't ready to do at the time either. So, and it probably took another year before we got to the point where he started putting on a lot of weight and eventually realized, okay, well, what am I doing here? And then you got to that point of frustration. And again, that's an inner game thing, like the point of frustration, moves you to act. When we started doing the intermittent fasting, he started to realize, oh, okay, well, why do I eat so often? How, like, maybe I can just, limit it to a certain part of the day. And then it just, all these assumptions that he had about when he wants to eat started to fall apart. And that's an inner game thing. As you're doing it, think about your relationship with food. Like, why do I eat at those times? Do I have to? Do I actually need this? That's what you're looking to get out of it. And when you're getting those, you're just sort of mining the resources of the inner game stuff from these techniques that people normally just attribute a sort of outer game thing to. And that's where I think that changes naturally start to happen. Then you automatically will be driven towards those behaviors that you want to do without having these internal shifts. The direction isn't going to change, because you've just been applying these random techniques, hoping that they would change everything. But internally, you haven't had that structural shift like in your inner game. If I had to narrow down what the inner game is, so I'm saying work on your inner game and then the outer game takes care of itself. But then, what the hell is the inner game? If I had to narrow it down to sort of three key things that drive your inner game, one of them is identity. Who we perceive ourselves to be is a major driver of behavior. If someone believes I'm an overweight person who can't control themselves and I always eat, when you've got sort of an identity like that, then you're always kind of allowing yourself to fail. Is it going to happen anyway? Or like, this is who I am. There's almost a certain comfort in that. When someone's identity starts to change, if there's lost weight and then, which is my story really is, I lost 30 kilos and then I was struggling to keep it off because I still felt fat. I still thought I'm a fat person. That's the way I've always been. And, it's such an identity of being a fat person. As you sort of start to put the weight back on, then you're sort of just like, well, that makes sense. Of course, this was going to happen. And then you kind of start to allow it to happen. I remember there was a moment where it was starting to happen. I had lost the whole weight. I had lost the 30 kilos. and had kept it off for probably about a year. But throughout that year, I slowly started to start putting it back on. And I felt like I just started to visualize where this was going. Am I going to really go back there? Am I going to be fat again? So my identity had started to shift slightly, but I was sort of in between two identities, at that point. I didn't want to go back there. That seed had been planted where I was just like, no, I'm not going to go back there. I don't want to be that person again. And I remember there was a certain resolve that I had. Like I had two paths in front of me. Am I just going to be who I've always been? Or am I going to make sure that I don't go back there? And at the time, I think it was largely driven by sort of pain and not wanting to be that, not wanting to go back there. The fear of being that again and living that way forever. In that moment, I remember I had a strong sense of resolve about who I was going to be and really more who I wasn't going to be. So then at that point, my identity was like, it's a transitionary identity where it was like, I am becoming this new person. Someone who is not going back there. Yeah. And this is the thing. It's not one clear identity shifting immediately into the next clear identity. These things slowly transform over time. They take shape and transform. So, there is that transitionary phase, which then I started to build and grow into. Then I started exploring fitness, and because it was essentially just food at first, where I lost the weight. And then as I became, sort of fitter and attached to this person I was becoming, my motivation and my commitment grew to be more and more of that. That identity shift was driving my behavior, that internal belief and state about who I was and where I was going, drive all of my outer behaviors. Would drive what I wanted to listen to, who I wanted to talk to, what I wanted to do with my time. Identity shit, right? And if your identity doesn't change, and this is a huge part of why people don't change, is that when they lose the weight, if their identity hasn't changed, then they just allow themselves to put it all back on. Some people call that self-sabotage, but that's and sometimes it might be, but I think more often than not, it's not about people sabotaging themselves so much as it is just being congruent with their identity. The thin body, it just didn't feel right. Yeah, so they unconsciously just felt more comfortable aligned with their identity. But again, if they did the inner work, then their outer game would have stayed in alignment with that. So all these different aspects of the inner game, they all work together, they all function together, but just for the sake of discussion, we sort of separate them out. Another important part of inner game is values, right? So what do you value? What are you valuing? If someone values sort of health and fitness and wellness, those things are going to drive their behaviors, but if someone enjoys having a good time, drinking a lot and, socializing and like that, you can value both of those things, but the fact is, whatever the one is of the higher value, if you just don't really care about health, you don't really care about fitness, you don't really care about those things, you're just not going to do those things because you don't really care about them, right? You can translate this into all different areas. If you really, really care about your relationship, with your partner or your family, you have to spend a lot more time there. You're going to sacrifice a lot of things to do it. And that's going to feel natural and normal. Another huge one is people valuing work and money. They spend more time there than in their relationships. And they'll sacrifice everything else just to make, to progress their career. On the other end is the people who don't value money and work and success. They just bum around. They don't do much because they just can't motivate themselves to do it because they don't value it, right? So values, they drive behavior. That's an inner game. So the more that you would cultivate, find a way to make yourself want those things, find a way to value, cultivate a certain value for find reasons why you want that. And then they will link into the identity as well. Your identity isn't disconnected from your values, right? So, and there's more we can say about that. The other one, a key thing is self-esteem. Self-esteem is important because if you just don't believe that it's going to work, one of the questions I ask in a coaching session is, out of 10, how confident are you that you're going to achieve these things? It's important because if someone says, 2, they're just not confident that they'll achieve it. It's like, the fact is, when it gets tough and it comes to hard decision points or that having to push themselves or sort of dig into some sort of motivation, the fact is, if in the back of your mind, it's like, well, it's never going to happen anyway. I can't do it. And again, you can see how that connects to identity, the identity of someone who can't do things and all that. The self-esteem piece is like, if you don't fundamentally believe that you can, that it's possible for you, if you just say you can't grow, you can't change, you can't do those things, then why bother? How much motivation can you possibly have for something that you just don't believe is possible? It's like it can't happen. So why am I putting in all this effort? Right. So self-esteem is important because you just won't even put the effort in. You can imagine someone who's sort of say, 150 kilos overweight or something, or even, even 50 kilos, right? Those people, they're so stuck in it. They've been that way for so long. And they've tried so many times to lose weight. Most of them, and they've just failed so much. They're just at a point of just not believing in their ability to do it. So every time any difficulty shows up, they're just like, oh, well, it's not going to happen, So I think it's important to have that self-esteem. Otherwise, you won't bother. You can't bother. You just can't, because humans aren't wired that way. To sort of be banging your head against the wall. The more things that you believe are possible for you, the more that you'll invest in learning in them. The more that you'll invest in all the skills that you need to develop. So it's a fundamental thing. And self-esteem is also built through applying yourself in a lot of different areas in life. So self-esteem is not just one thing. It's a lot of things. The social relationships you have, it's your ability to be independent and to do things. Your ability to sort of communicate and connect with others. It's like there's so much about it that has to do with fulfillment and drive. There's a lot more we can say about that, but you can see how if we just had to nail it down to those three things, I think if you were to work on those things, on your identity, your values, and your self-esteem, that would go a long, long, long way to driving a natural outer game that loses weight, that brings you fulfillment, and it improves your body and your mind and your life and all those things. So losing weight isn't it a game? Hopefully these things help you. Hopefully these things bring some clarity to it. And look, don't trust yourself to do the outer game. Don't trust yourself to be able to force yourself into those things. Just work on the inner game in whatever little way. Forget about the outer stuff. Just work on those things. So hopefully that was useful to you. There's a lot to take in. Share with a friend. Click like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And tell me what you thought about it, down in the comments. And look around for some other videos that are going to help you improve your inner game. Keep following along, because I know you talk more and more about this sort of thing, to untangle the web of all this complexity and help you make massive, beautiful changes in your life. Okay? Great. So, peace.